So if you've taken a look at the Allison article, one of the big takeaways is that one of the things that makes foreign policy not function the way we might like, uh, with a sort of rational unitary actor running the show, is that problems get divided up among sort of different organizations within the bureaucracy, and those organizations don't always coordinate effectively. And so I think it's worth sort of having a conversation about the bureaucracy and what that looks like. And I'm actually going to sort of expand that conversation out a little bit further here at the end. But I want to just begin with the foreign policy bureaucracy involves a lot of stuff. Includes all the organizations that are involved in policy making, policy execution, information collection, and that might be way more organizations that you might think about at first glance. It's not just the State Department. There's lots of organizations that are involved in sort of, implementing policy on the ground. This is my sort of rough attempt to sketch out the foreign policy bureaucracy. It's actually probably incomplete. I think under Department of Defense, I probably should add a box now for Space Force under my sort of president, my sort of line of important agencies. I probably should have Homeland Security in there as well. But I will flag a couple things about this sort of attempt to organize things. So you have the president who sort of directly oversees all these different agencies or cabinet posts. But then you also have sort of national security advisor. This is sort of the person who advises the president on foreign policy and who runs the National Security Council, which draws representatives from lots of different organizations and important people who can advise the president and organizes them into committees that then sort of help craft policy and generate sort of interagency agreements that help say, this is what we're working toward, and these are our goals, and how we're going to try to implement foreign policy. And so you have that sort of mechanism that tries to coordinate all those pieces. There's also the Director of National Intelligence, who after the post-September 11th reorganization of the intelligence community does what the director of the CIA used to try to do, which is to get all these different agencies that are involved in intelligence collection to speak to each other when they maybe don't always do that for a wide variety of reasons. So we could think about, who's involved in dealing with foreign states. Right? In theory, you would think this would be just the State Department, but the FBI does sort of, operations with law enforcement in other countries. Commerce Department might be involved in trade relationships. Similarly, the Ag Department might be involved in trade relationships. Department of Defense does all sorts of joint military operations and coordinations with other governments. So again, that responsibility of who's talking with foreign states is distributed across multiple different agencies and departments. My intelligence collection sort of graph is woefully limited. I think there's actually like 13 different departments or agencies that are involved in intelligence collection. For example, I don't have the Coast Guard on here. They should be on here. Homeland Security should be on here, but you get the idea. The FBI is involved in intelligence collection. The State Department has its own intelligence collection folks. The CIA is, like, in theory, the intelligence collection organization, and yet their budget is dwarfed by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is housed under the Department of Defense, right? Which is why we have a Director of National Intelligence whose job it is to try to get these agencies to cooperate, share information, work together, and be effective. Thinking about who deals with security, again, distributed across a lot of different things, right? FBI, Homeland Security, Department of Defense, CIA, lots of different organizations that are involved in security, right? So we can think about bureaucracy as sort of this variety of different agencies that are all sort of organized in a hierarchical chart. And in theory, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to direct and coordinate and make sure that they're all on the same page. But I'm going to try to argue that that's actually an understatement of the complexity of the problem. And I think that that's sort of what we might think about as sort of the way that traditional foreign policy has been conducted. But increasingly, foreign policy involves this idea of public diplomacy, right? So it's not just sort of representatives of states talking to other representatives of states. It's representatives of states interacting with the publics of other countries, trying to build up goodwill. It's maybe not even representatives of states at all. It's maybe like people like you and I who are going to other countries and building up goodwill through interpersonal connections. And I had a sort of experience doing this in a variety of ways, and I'll try and just kind of build up some of what I've seen in a way that I hope captures sort of the complexity of what's going on here. And so this is sort of my first cut experience and exposure to the extended network of the foreign policy environment, right? And so there's me sitting at a U.S. university and working with the Institute for International Education, which helps coordinate the Fulbright program, as well as the Boren program, as well as a number of others, right? And so my job is to recruit students to apply for these programs that help feed into the foreign policy establishment. My job is to serve as a reviewer for these programs, to help select people for these awards, help feed people into the foreign policy establishment. The Boren, for example, specifically has a government service requirement. You get this scholarship, you go and study and learn a language that's of critical importance to the United States. And then the idea is that you'll then work for the federal government for a year in sort of the national security diplomacy infrastructure in the form of bureaucracy, right? So you've got the State Department that's benefiting from the Boren, as well as other agencies. You've got the US government that's funding the State Department, the US government that's funding the Institute for International Education. Okay, so it's this little network. Then a couple years later, I got involved in a faculty exchange with a university in China. And what I found is that we were sending students to this university in China. There were Fulbrighters there, students who were studying Chinese from the Boren program. I was sending faculty to the school. I've also added this other networks active in China, which maybe hints that there's more to the story. Right? So already we've got this sort of connection of I'm involved in international relations, and there's negotiations, and there's it's described as the chill, where President Xi Jinping suggested that there was too much US influence on Chinese campuses, and suddenly it became very difficult to work on Chinese universities, but they very much wanted us there because of a wide variety of things related to prestige and programming. The following year, I sort of became aware of this grant that my university had written. It was a State Department grant, so we've got funding from the State Department to do cultural programming in China. And I was able to use the sort of connection with the Chinese university to help do this. And so it involved maybe going to this sort of, I don't know what to call it, sort of a booking company that was run by a former Fulbrighter in Shanghai called Ping Pong Productions, where she basically connected with folks in the US arts community and brought them into China and ran them through and worked with these universities that were working with the State Department grant that were trying to get cultural programming onto Chinese campuses, which is the exact sort of thing that Xi Jinping didn't like that we were trying to do. And then it turns out that there's not just sort of my university doing this, there's dozens of universities doing this. And I got invited to attend this American Cultural Centers Exchange Conference in which all of the universities providing this cultural programming in China as part of the State Department grant got together and planned out their programming for the coming year. Lots of folks were there. The Ford Foundation was there. In fact, I think the Ford Foundation paid for the conference. The Luce Foundation, which was also running a sort of American cultural or American studies curriculum development program for China. They were there trying to get American faculty to adopt their programming and their curriculum. There were lots of representatives from the arts community that were trying to participate in this program. There were State Department representatives. This was foreign policy. This was public diplomacy. This was the effect of a conversation between senators and the State Department in hearings saying, what is the United States doing to build up public diplomacy in China, to be on college campuses in China. This was the implementation, and yet it involved nothing that looks anything like bureaucracy. It looked like this network. And once I sort of stepped back and sort of saw like how all of these different pieces are sort of fitting together to carry out policy on the ground, I suddenly realized that this was just one network, that there were actually dozens and maybe hundreds of these different networks that were being facilitated by US government money, by State Department grants, by private foundations, that were all kind of loosely collaborating to sort of move foreign policy in the direction the United States was hoping to see it go. And again, it's not foreign policy, it's not diplomacy the way we would think about it traditionally, right? I was not there as an agent of the state, and yet it's also not diplomacy. It's this other messier, murkier kind of thing that I think is not fully appreciated and incorporated into our theories about how foreign policy gets made and implemented and carried out when we focus on just the sort of traditional bureaucracy.